This story is titled, My Dad Gave Our Family Business to My Sister's Boyfriend and Called Me Selfish for Opposing It. But a couple of months later, they are begging after he destroyed the business. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Throwaway for obvious reasons. Long post ahead, buckle up. So this has been eating me alive for the past 2 years, and I need to get this off my chest. Never thought I'd be posting here, but I'm at my wit's end and could use some outside perspective. This is a wild ride from start to finish. And yes, there's an update at the end that some of you justice lovers will appreciate. Background. I, 31 male, have worked in my family's commercial fishing business since I was literally a teenager. My grandfather started it, my dad expanded it, and I was supposed to be the next in line, until I wasn't. Our family business is a commercial fishing operation that's been around for over 50 years. My grandfather started with just one boat and built it into a fleet of 8 vessels that supplies seafood restaurants across 3 states. I practically grew up on those boats. I remember being 8 years old, waking up at 4 a.m. to go with my dad to the docks, watching the men prep the boats as the sun came up. By the time I was 12, I knew every species of fish we caught and what they were worth per pound. By 16, I was helping manage the crew schedules in summer, and by 22, while my college friends were getting internships at desk jobs, I was already handling our major client relationships while finishing my business degree. I'm 6 feet 2 inches, spend most mornings at the gym, and have always been the guy my dad, 59 male, counted on when shit hit the fan. Last year, when one of our boats had an engine failure 50 miles offshore, I'm the one who organized the rescue operation, got a replacement part helicoptered out, and saved a $200,000 catch from spoiling. That's the kind of problem solving I brought to the table every single day. My sister Vanessa, 28 female, never showed any interest in the business. While I was learning the ropes and busting my ass on the boats, she was constantly changing majors in college and finding herself. First it was psychology, then communications, then marketing. She finally settled on graphic design, but hasn't done much with the degree. I don't hold it against her. Not everyone is cut out for the grind of a family business, but I was the one who'd been there, who knew every client by name, who could tell you the profit margins on every species we caught, who'd worked personally with every captain in our fleet. I've dated on and off over the years, but nothing serious. The business has always been my main commitment. My last girlfriend broke things off because she said I was married to the job. Maybe that's true, but when you've poured your heart and soul into something your whole life, it becomes part of you. So when Dad called a family meeting 2 years ago, I figured he was finally ready to talk about succession planning. I'd been subtly bringing it up for months, mentioning how I had ideas for expanding our distribution network and modernizing some of our processes without losing the personal touch that made us special. We all gathered in the dining room of my parents' house, the same house I grew up in, with fishing photos and mounted catches covering the walls. Mom, 57 female, had made her famous clam chowder, and even though it was a Tuesday night, it felt like a special occasion. Dad cleared his throat like he always does before saying something important. I've decided to take a step back from daily operations, he announced. Fair enough, I thought. He'd worked hard his whole life, built on what his father started, and deserved to enjoy his later years. He was approaching 60 and still working 12-hour days sometimes. I sat up straighter, ready to hear about my new responsibilities. But then he dropped a fucking grenade in my lap. And I'm putting Todd in charge as the new operations manager. Todd? My sister's boyfriend of 18 months? The 33-year-old entrepreneur who'd never held a job longer than a year? The dude wore loafers to our boat dock, for fuck's sake. The first time he came to the marina, he asked if the diesel fuel we use in the boats was environmentally friendly. I nearly burst out laughing. I looked at my sister, who was beaming and squeezing Todd's hand. Todd sat there with this satisfied smirk, nodding as if he'd known all along. Todd has fresh ideas, my dad continued, oblivious to my shock. He has an MBA and we need someone with a different perspective. I later found out Todd's MBA was some online certificate program that cost $2,000 and took 6 weeks to complete. But in that moment, I was too stunned to even ask questions. Dad, I finally managed to say, Todd doesn't know anything about commercial fishing. That's exactly why we need him, Dad replied, as if it was the most logical thing in the world. He's not bogged down by industry conventions. He can see opportunities we're missing. I looked at my mom, hoping for an ally. But she just gave me that look she always does when she doesn't want to contradict Dad in public. Vanessa was glaring at me like I just insulted her firstborn child. I tried not to show how gutted I was. I didn't want to come off as the jealous son. So I nodded and congratulated Todd, who had this smug little grin that made me want to throw him overboard. After dinner, I pulled my dad aside in his study, the room where he'd taught me to tie fishing knots when I was a kid. "Don't you think someone who knows the business should be in charge?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "You mean yourself?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. "I've been running half the operation for years, Dad. I know our clients, our fleet, our crews. I've been the one handling the Northeastern accounts that make up 40% of our revenue. That's exactly the problem, Jake. You're too set in the old ways." Todd has a vision for modernizing. What vision? He's never even worked in this industry. Dad put his hand on my shoulder. "Son, sometimes fresh eyes see things we can't. Give him a chance. He's got good ideas for expanding our online presence." Online presence? Dad, our business is built on relationships. Our clients buy from us because they trust us, because we've proven ourselves reliable for decades. That doesn't come from a website or social media. The world is changing, Jake. We need to change with it. I should have fought harder then. I should have laid out exactly why this was such a terrible idea. But I respected my dad too much. I thought maybe he saw something in Todd that I was missing. Big fucking mistake. 6 months later, our once rock-solid business was taking on water fast. We lost Fleming's Seafood, a client we'd had for 25 years. Then Coastal Cuisine, another major account. Captain Mike, who'd been with us since I was in diapers, quit along with 2 other veteran captains. I was still handling our East Coast clients, which thankfully were still profitable. Every morning, I'd wake up at 4:30, hit the gym for an hour, and be at the docks by 6:30 to make sure our day boats got out on time. Then I'd head to the office to handle calls, manage shipments, and solve problems. Basically doing everything I'd always done, but now with the extra challenge of working around Todd's improvements. One of those improvements was a new routing system that made zero sense if you understood anything about coastal navigation or fuel efficiency. Another was a software package that cost $50,000 and was supposed to streamline operations, but mostly just complicated things and crashed regularly. Then there was the redesigned logo and website that cost $30,000 and generated exactly zero new business. But every time I walked into headquarters, the most noticeable change was the atmosphere. It was like a funeral home. People looked miserable, tense, like they were just waiting for the axe to fall. Todd had fired 2 of our office staff who'd been with us for years and replaced them with his friends who spent more time on their phones than actually working. One day, Ray, our fleet maintenance manager for 20-plus years, pulled me aside after I finished inventory. Ray's the kind of guy who can fix anything with an engine, the type who's worth his weight in gold in our business. His hands are permanently stained with engine grease, and he's got this perpetual sunburn from years on the water. "Jake, this place is going to shit," he whispered, looking over his shoulder to make sure no one heard. "Todd doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground. He's restructured the routes so we're burning extra fuel, he's alienated half the dock workers, and he's hired 3 of his buddies from college who don't know the first thing about commercial fishing." "What's my dad saying about all this?" I asked, already guessing the answer. Ray just shook his head. "Your dad's barely here anymore. Todd tells him everything's fine, shows him some bullshit charts with fancy graphics, and your dad eats it up." "What about the captains who've left?" Dad must have asked about that. "Todd told him they were resistant to change and that we needed younger captains anyway. Called them dinosaurs, if you can believe that." Your dad seemed to buy it, even though those dinosaurs are the reason this company has survived storms, recessions, and everything else for 5 decades. I was trying to keep my cool, but inside I was raging. I'd spent my entire adult life helping build this business, learning every aspect of it, earning the respect of our crews and clients. Now this dipshit was driving it into the ground, and my dad was letting it happen. That afternoon, I tried calling Fleming's Seafood, hoping to find out why they'd really left us. The owner, Sam Fleming, had always been straight with me. We'd had dinner at each other's homes, and I'd watched his kids grow up. "Jake," he said when he heard my voice. "Been a while." "Yeah, Sam. I heard you guys aren't buying from us anymore." There was a pause. "Look, I didn't want to make waves, but that new guy, Todd, he's a problem. First, he raised our prices without any notice. Then he messed up 3 shipments in a row. When I called to complain, he basically told me if I didn't like it, I could find another supplier." "He what?" I felt my blood pressure rising. "Yeah. Said something about how you guys were moving upmarket and couldn't cater to price-sensitive clients anymore." Jake, we've been doing business for 25 years. Your grandfather used to personally deliver our orders. It felt like a slap in the face. I apologized profusely, but the damage was done. Sam had signed a contract with another supplier. I called 3 other former clients and heard similar stories. Todd was systematically destroying relationships that had taken decades to build. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather, how he'd built this business from nothing, how proud he was when my dad took it over and expanded it, how proud they both were when I joined. And now some arrogant blowhard who knew nothing about our industry was tearing it all down in a matter of months. I decided it was time to talk to my dad. Really talk to him. After a few sleepless nights, I decided to confront my dad. We've always had a complicated relationship. He's old school, the type who shows affection by teaching you to tie knots or fix an engine, not by saying I love you. But I knew he cared about the legacy my grandfather built. I caught him alone at the main office on a Sunday. He was going through some paperwork, probably trying to make sense of the mess Todd was creating. As soon as I mentioned the business problems, his body language changed. Jaw tight, shoulders squared, the way he gets when he's backed into a corner. Dad, we need to talk about what's happening with the company. Everything's fine, Jake. There's always an adjustment period with new management. It's not fine, Dad. We've lost 5 major clients in 6 months. 3 of our best captains have quit. Our fuel costs are through the roof because of Todd's new routes. Todd is innovating, he said flatly. Change is hard for people. Dad, innovation is great, but he's losing clients we've had for decades. The captains are jumping ship. Our fuel costs are up 30% because of his new routing system. That makes no sense if you know anything about coastal navigation, which Todd clearly doesn't. Dad sighed that heavy sigh I've known my whole life. Every new manager makes mistakes, Jake. I made plenty when I took over from your grandfather. This isn't about normal learning curves, Dad. The business is bleeding money. Captain Mike said Todd barely knows bow from stern, and he's making decisions about fleet operations. That's when my dad's expression hardened. So that's it. You're jealous because I didn't put you in charge. That hit me like a punch to the gut. This isn't about me, Dad. It's about preserving what Grandpa built, what you built, what I've helped build for the last decade. You don't think I know what's best for this company? I've been running it since before you were born. Then why can't you see what Todd is doing? Have you talked to any of our clients? Have you asked why they're leaving? Have you spoken to the captains about why they're quitting? Dad shuffled some papers on his desk. Todd has explained all of that. The clients who left were too demanding and not profitable enough. The captains weren't adapting to the new systems. And you believe that? Dad, I talked to Sam Fleming yesterday. Todd told him we were moving upmarket and couldn't cater to price-sensitive clients anymore. Sam's been with us for 25 years. Grandpa used to deliver fish to him personally. Times change, Jake. Not every old client fits our new business model. What new business model? Losing money? Alienating loyal customers? Driving away experienced employees? I was struggling to keep my voice down. Dad stood up, his face red. That's enough! I'm still the owner of this company, and I make the decisions. Todd is bringing us into the modern age, whether you like it or not. But he wasn't hearing me. He dismissed every concern, had an excuse for every problem. Todd just needed time. The clients who left were too demanding anyway. The captains who quit were resistant to necessary changes. I left feeling like I was taking crazy pills. My dad had always been a smart businessman with good instincts. How could he not see what was happening? That night, Captain Mike called me. Captain Mike had been with our company for over 30 years. He taught me how to navigate, how to read the weather, how to find fish when others came back empty-handed. He was as much a part of our business as the boats themselves. Jake, I need to tell you something I couldn't say while I was still working there. I think Todd is skimming money. The books don't add up, and suddenly he's driving a brand new Audi and took Vanessa to the Bahamas last month. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just incompetence. This could be fraud. But who would believe me if I brought it up? I just looked like the bitter son who got passed over. Do you have any proof, Mike? Nothing concrete. But I saw some paperwork on his desk once. Invoices from a company I'd never heard of. When I asked about it, he got real defensive and said it was none of my business. That company was being paid $5,000 a month for consulting services. Did you ever see anyone from this company at our offices? Any evidence they were actually doing something for that money? Nope. Never saw anyone. Never heard of any consulting being done. But here's the kicker. I looked up the company later. It's registered to Todd's brother-in-law from his first marriage. Now the pieces were starting to fit together. Todd wasn't just incompetent. He was actively stealing from us. From my family. From the business my grandfather and father had built over half a century. But I knew that going to my dad with suspicions wouldn't be enough. I needed proof, and I needed to figure out exactly how bad the damage was before it was too late. I thought maybe my sister would listen to reason, so I invited her for lunch. Huge mistake. We met at a sushi place near her apartment. Vanessa showed up 15 minutes late, looking irritated that I'd interrupted her day. She'd always been the baby of the family, the one everyone made excuses for. "So what's this about?" she asked, not even bothering with hello. "I have a meeting at 2. It's about the business, Vanessa. Things aren't going well." She rolled her eyes. "Here we go again. You've never given Todd a chance. You've been undermining him from day one because you think you deserve to run the business." I tried to stay calm. "This isn't about who deserves what. It's about the health of the company. Have you looked at the numbers lately? We've lost 3 major clients. Our best captains have quit, and there are serious questions about the finances." Her face flushed red. "What's that supposed to mean? Where did Todd get the money for that Audi? Or your Bahamas trip? His last job was at a failing startup that didn't even pay him his final check." She stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "How dare you? Todd got a loan for the car, and the trip was with points from his credit card. You're just making up lies because you can't stand that Dad trusts him more than you." People in the restaurant were staring now. I kept my voice low. "Vanessa, I'm not trying to attack you or Todd. I'm worried about the business, about Dad's legacy, about the employees who depend on us for their livelihoods." "Oh, please. You're such a martyr, always acting like you're the only one who cares about the family. Todd is bringing the company into the 21st century, and you can't handle it because it means you're not as essential as you thought you were." That stung, but I pressed on. "Has Todd explained why our profits are down 40% since he took over? Or why we lost the Coastal Cuisine account that represented 15% of our annual revenue? Those old clients were holding us back. Todd is focusing on higher-end restaurants that pay better rates. Except that's not happening. We're not getting those higher-end clients, and we're losing the reliable ones we've had for years." She grabbed her purse and stood up. "I'm not listening to this anymore. You're just jealous and bitter, because Dad sees something special in Todd that he doesn't see in you." She stormed out of the restaurant, leaving me with 2 untouched meals and a sick feeling in my stomach. I'd never seen my sister like that. She'd always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who could see both sides. Now she was completely blind when it came to Todd. Later that night, she sent me a text. "Stay away from the business and stay away from me and Todd. You're toxic and Dad agrees with me." That's when I knew I was truly alone in this fight. I spent the next few days gathering information. I spoke with more former employees, clients who'd left us, and even some of our suppliers. The picture that emerged was worse than I thought. Todd had alienated not just our clients, but also our suppliers. He'd been late on payments, tried to renegotiate long-standing agreements, and even threatened to take his business elsewhere if they didn't lower their prices, not realizing that in our specialized industry, there weren't always alternatives. One of our boat mechanics, Dave, told me that Todd had cut corners on maintenance to save money. He told us to stretch the oil changes, to make the parts last longer. That's dangerous as hell on a commercial vessel. You know that better than anyone, Jake. I did know. I'd been on a boat once when the engine failed 100 miles offshore. We were lucky the Coast Guard got to us before a storm hit. Cutting corners on maintenance wasn't just bad business. It could cost lives. But the more I learned, the more I felt trapped. My dad wouldn't listen. My sister had turned against me. And meanwhile, Todd was systematically destroying everything my family had built. I decided I had one option left: confront Todd directly. I messaged Todd asking to meet me at a cafe near the marina. He agreed, probably thinking he could smooth things over with his fake charm. I spent the days before gathering information, talking to former employees, reviewing what financial documents I still had access to, speaking with clients who'd left. I came armed with facts, not just suspicions. Todd showed up 20 minutes late, sporting designer sunglasses and that perpetual smirk. "Jake, my man!" "What's up, brother?" He tried to give me one of those bro hugs. I stayed seated. "Let's cut the bullshit, Todd. I know what you're doing to the business." His smile dimmed a few watts. "Look, I get it. Change is hard. Your dad warned me you might have trouble adjusting to the new direction." "New direction?" I laughed. "Is that what we're calling losing 40% of our clients? Or having 3 captains quit who've been with us over 15 years? Or maybe the new direction is the $43,000 that disappeared from the maintenance fund right before you bought your Audi." The smirk disappeared completely. "You don't know what you're talking about. I grew up in this business, Todd. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know that we're operating at a loss for the first time in 30 years. I know you hired your college roommate as our new accountant despite him having zero experience with commercial fishing operations. And I know my dad signed over 30% of the business to you without telling me. Officer, that last bit was a guess based on something Captain Mike had mentioned, but Todd's reaction confirmed it. Your dad recognizes talent when he sees it, Todd said, leaning forward. Maybe if you weren't so stuck in the old ways, he would have chosen you instead. This business was built on those old ways, relationships, trust, expertise, things you know nothing about. Todd's face darkened. Look, Jake, I get that you're upset, but the business is changing, evolving. Your dad sees that, even if you don't. And let me be clear about something. This isn't just your dad's company anymore. It's partly mine now, too. So unless you want to create a big family drama that'll break your dad's heart, I suggest you back off and let me do my job. I wanted to punch his smug face, but instead I just stood up, towering over him. This isn't over, Todd. My grandfather and father built this business through hard work and integrity. I won't let you destroy it with your incompetence and greed. As I walked out, he called after me. Your dad already chose sides, Jake. Don't make this worse for yourself. I spent the drive home replaying the conversation in my head. Todd had basically admitted that my dad had given him a stake in the business. My family's business. The business I'd worked in my entire life. And he'd done it without even telling me. It felt like the ultimate betrayal. Not just from my dad, but from the whole family. They'd pushed me aside for some smooth-talking con man who was bleeding the company dry. When I got home, I punched my heavy bag for an hour until my knuckles were raw, then took a cold shower and tried to think clearly. I had two options. I could keep fighting a losing battle, trying to save a business that the owners, my own family, seemed determined to run into the ground. Or I could walk away, focus on my own future, and let them deal with the consequences of their decisions. The fighter in me wanted to stay and battle it out. But the realist knew that without my dad's support, without my sister's understanding, I was just banging my head against a wall. I decided to make one last attempt to save the business. I would get concrete proof of Todd's mismanagement and possible fraud. Evidence so compelling that even my dad couldn't ignore it. I spent the next week getting my ducks in a row. I talked to Marcus, an old family friend who's an accountant and has done work for our business over the years. He helped me gain access to the company's financial records, which my dad had never officially locked me out of. What we found made me sick to my stomach. In just 8 months, Todd had taken out $120,000 in business development loans, with no clear use for the funds, hired 4 friends in made-up positions with salaries totaling over $300,000, rerouted our fleet in ways that increased fuel costs by 42%, lost 5 of our 8 biggest clients, put the company credit card in his name, and racked up $67,000 in charges at restaurants, electronics stores, and luxury hotels. And the kicker? My dad had indeed signed over 30% ownership to Todd, with an option for Todd to buy another 30% at a ridiculously low valuation within 3 years. The paperwork had been drawn up by Todd's uncle, who happens to be a corporate lawyer. Marcus looked grim as we reviewed the documents. Jake, this is bad. Really bad. If things continue this way, the company will be bankrupt within a year. Is there anything illegal here? Anything we could use to void the contract? Marcus pointed to several suspicious transactions. These payments to Atlantic Consulting Group, that company doesn't seem to exist except on paper. It's registered to an address that's actually a UPS store. And these equipment purchases, the amounts seem inflated, and there's no record of the equipment actually arriving at your facility. So he's embezzling. It looks that way, but to prove it legally would require a forensic audit and probably a lawsuit. It would get ugly. I printed everything out and went to see my dad at home. I found him in his workshop where he's always gone to think. He was working on a scale model of our first fishing boat, the one my grandfather had started the business with. Dad, we need to talk about Todd. He looked up from the model, his face already set in that stubborn expression I know too well. Jake, I thought we settled this. You need to see these documents, I said, laying them out on his workbench. Todd is bleeding the company dry. He's funneling money to himself and his friends. He's destroyed client relationships that took decades to build. At first, my dad tried to dismiss it all. These are just growing pains. Any transition of leadership has bumps in the road. Growing pains don't cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, Dad. Look at this. Payments to a fake consulting company that's actually owned by Todd's brother-in-law. Inflated equipment purchases for items we never received. Personal expenses charged to the company card. As I showed him document after document, spreadsheet after spreadsheet, his defenses started to crumble. When I showed him the charges from a luxury resort in the Bahamas on the company card, he finally fell silent. After a long pause, he looked up at me with tired eyes. What do you want me to do, Jake? I signed a contract. I gave him my word. Your word to a con man doesn't mean shit, Dad. We need to talk to a lawyer and see if we can void the contract based on fraud. He shook his head. That would tear the family apart. Your sister is in love with him. They're talking about getting married. So you'd rather let Todd destroy everything you and Grandpa built? Everything I've worked for my whole life? My dad looked away. I need time to think. This is a lot to process. I left the documents with him, hoping they'd finally open his eyes. But as I drove away, I had a sinking feeling that it was too late. The damage might already be too extensive to fix. The next day, my dad called and asked me to come to the office. When I arrived, I was shocked to find Todd sitting there with him, along with my sister. Jake, my dad said, his voice unnaturally formal. I've discussed your concerns with Todd, and he's explained everything to my satisfaction. Todd sat there with that smug look again. My sister was glaring at me. Explained what exactly? I asked, my anger rising. How he's embezzling money? How he's driving away our best clients? Those are serious accusations, Todd said, his voice calm but with an edge of threat. Accusations that could be considered defamation if you started spreading them around. My dad held up his hand. No one is accusing anyone of anything. There have been some unusual financial decisions, but Todd has explained them all. The consulting fees were for market research. The equipment purchases went to a new supplier who offered better quality. And you believe that? I looked at my dad, searching for any sign of the shrewd businessman he used to be. Did you ask to see the market research? Did you check if the new equipment actually arrived? That's enough, Jake, my sister cut in. Todd has been working his ass off to modernize this dinosaur of a company, and all you've done is try to undermine him at every turn. I looked at each of them in turn. My dad, avoiding my eyes. My sister, defensive and angry. Todd, triumphant. In that moment, I knew I'd lost. Not just the battle, but the entire war. I'm done, I said quietly. You've made your choice. I hope it works out for you. I walked out of the office, out of the business, out of that chapter of my life. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, walking away from everything I'd spent my life building. But sometimes the only way to preserve your sanity is to let go. I did what any self-respecting man would do. I moved on and focused on building my own life. I took a job with Harborside Seafood, one of our former competitors. Within 6 months, I was their operations director, and I brought several of our old clients with me. While I would have liked to have just completely forgotten about my family's business, I couldn't help but keep tabs through Ray, who still worked there and gave me occasional updates. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Todd bought another luxury car. My sister started posting photos of expensive jewelry. My dad became less and less involved, spending most of his time alone on his small personal fishing boat. Then COVID hit, and the restaurant industry collapsed overnight. A well-run operation might have weathered the storm. We had weathered many in the past, but Todd's mismanagement had left the company with no reserves and mountains of debt. 14 months after I walked away, my phone rang at 11 p.m. It was my sister, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. Jake, please, Jake. When she calmed down enough to talk, she told me the business was bankrupt. The bank had seized 4 of the boats. The remaining crews hadn't been paid in 3 weeks. My dad had suffered a minor heart attack from the stress. Where's Todd? I asked, already knowing the answer. More sobbing. He's gone. He cleared out our joint account and disappeared. He left me a note saying the business failed because Dad wouldn't let him fully implement his vision. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. So now you want my help? Jake, please. Dad's heart. The doctors say he needs to avoid stress, but the bank is threatening to take the house since he used it as collateral for a loan Todd convinced him to take out. We don't know what to do. Part of me wanted to say, I told you so. Part of me wanted to hang up and let them deal with the mess they'd created when they pushed me aside. But another part, the part that still remembered fishing with my dad when I was 8, the part that still loved my sister despite everything, couldn't do it. I'll come by tomorrow to look at the paperwork, I said finally. I'm not making any promises. The next day, I walked into my childhood home to find my dad aged 10 years, sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by overdue notices and legal documents. My sister couldn't even look me in the eye. The house was a mess, with packing boxes everywhere. They were preparing for the possibility of having to move out. I'm sorry, son, my dad said quietly. You were right. About everything. It turns out Todd had fled to Mexico with over $200,000 in stolen funds. He'd forged my dad's signature on several documents, which might help us legally, but the business was still in ruins. He'd maxed out the company credit cards, emptied the business accounts, and even taken out loans using company assets as collateral. My sister looked shell-shocked. I really thought he loved me, she said, her voice hollow. I defended him against everyone, and he was just using me to get to the business. I wanted to say, no shit, Sherlock, but seeing her broken like that, I couldn't bring myself to twist the knife. Instead, I started making calls. I reached out to my contacts in the industry. I contacted Marcus for legal advice. I called the clients I hadn't brought to Harborside, seeing if they'd be willing to come back under new management. I even called Captain Mike, who was now working for another fishing operation, to ask for his advice. The damage was extensive. Todd had not only run the business into the ground financially, he'd also destroyed its reputation in the industry. Suppliers had been stiffed, clients had received poor quality products, and the fleet had been neglected to the point that 2 of the boats weren't even seaworthy anymore. But I decided to give it one last shot, not for my dad or sister who had betrayed my trust, but for my grandfather, for the legacy he'd built, for the employees who'd been loyal to us for decades. It took 6 months of 80-hour weeks, legal battles, refinancing, and rebuilding trust, but we managed to save 2 of the boats and keep the business afloat, albeit in a much smaller form. My sister went back to school to finish her business degree, humbled by the experience. My dad slowly regained his health and his pride as we worked side by side. One night, as we were going over the books in the office, showing an actual profit for the first time since Todd took over, my dad looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I should have trusted you, Jake. You were always the heart of this business, just like your grandfather. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The lesson had been learned the hard way. Sometimes I think about Todd, probably sipping drinks on a beach somewhere with some other woman he's conning. But then I look at what we've rebuilt. Something solid, honest, and real. Something built on hard work and trust. Karma's a bitch, but so is the long arm of the law. 2 months ago, we got a call from the FBI. Turns out Todd had pulled similar scams from other businesses before ours. They'd been tracking him for years, and our case gave them enough evidence to issue an international warrant. They've frozen assets in 3 countries, and there are reports he's been spotted in Cancun. He won't be living the high life for long. As for me, I'm now the official owner and CEO of what we've renamed Founding Father Fishing, in honor of my grandfather. Dad signed over his remaining share to me, keeping only 10% for himself as a consultant. He's finally enjoying semi-retirement, going out on the boats when he feels like it but trusting me to run the day-to-day operations. My sister works in accounting where I can keep an eye on her, but she's proving herself every day. The Todd disaster humbled her in ways nothing else could have. Last week, she caught a billing error that saved us $15,000. It's a start. We're down to 3 boats instead of 8, but they're all well-maintained and running efficiently. I rehired Captain Mike and Ray, giving them both ownership stakes so they'd never be tempted to leave again. Some of our old clients have come back, and we're slowly rebuilding our reputation in the industry. Every morning, I still hit the gym at 5 a.m. I still work until sundown. I still personally inspect every boat before it leaves harbor. Some call it being obsessive. I call it giving a damn about what you build. Last month, I took our newest boat out myself, a 14-hour trip in rough seas that netted us a record haul. Nothing beats the feeling of coming back to port with a full hold, knowing you've conquered whatever the ocean threw at you. Dad sometimes looks at me with a mix of pride and regret. I know he's still beating himself up about Todd, about how he almost lost everything our family had built. One night, after a particularly good day, he tried to apologize again. Son, I cut him off. It's done, Dad. Water under the bridge. We're moving forward now. He nodded, understanding that some things don't need to be said. The business may be smaller now, but it's stronger. It's mine. And nobody's going to take that from me again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's rebuilding better than before. Todd tried to destroy us, but instead, he forced us to strip everything down and rebuild from the foundation. Now we're leaner, smarter, and hungrier than ever. I still haven't taken a vacation in 2 years. Haven't had a serious relationship in longer than that. But when I stand on the dock at sunrise, watching our boats head out to sea, my boats, my crews, my family legacy, I know it's all been worth it. That's the thing about family businesses. They're not just about making money. They're about legacy, about pride, about building something that outlasts you. Todd never understood that. He saw our business as something to exploit, to milk for quick cash. He never understood that what makes a family business special is the family part, the generations of knowledge, the pride in doing things right, the responsibility you feel to those who came before you and those who will come after. So if you're reading this and you're dealing with your own Todd situation, my advice is simple. Fight like hell for what matters. And if you lose that fight, be prepared to walk away and start over. Sometimes that's the only way to truly save what's important. The business may be smaller now, but it's mine, and nobody's going to take that from me again.